So if you sit down at a table today to play a narrative-driven RPG, you generally expect a certain rhythm to it.
Right, yeah. Like, the mechanics of the game and the story are supposed to work together.
Exactly. You uncover a clue, you roll a skill check, and the plot just gracefully moves forward.
Yeah.
The whole architecture of the game dictates what you can do.
And everyone at the table agrees to that social contract, before they even open the rule book.
But if you roll the clock back to the early 1980s, that clean structural harmony, it just didn't exist yet.
Oh, not at all. The medium of interactive storytelling was experiencing these really aggressive, almost violent growing pains.
Yeah, you had designers trying to force incredibly complex layered narratives into rule sets that were, well, originally built for pure tactical wargaming.
Which is a huge structural clash.
Totally. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up this exhaustive archival dossier, breaking down a very specific artifact from 1982. It's a 32-page tabletop module called X3, Curse of Xanathon.
It's such a fascinating piece of history.
It really is. And our mission for you today is to explore how this incredibly obscure booklet about, like, a mad duke, a dwarven beer tax, and a cult of Ethingarian immigrants accidentally became this highly polarizing missing link that basically revolutionized modern game design.
Yeah, it really is the messy bridge to the modern era.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack this. Imagine you're a player in 1982. You're used to games that are basically just kicking down doors, killing goblins, grabbing gold.
Very straightforward hack and slash stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And suddenly you are thrust into a medieval political espionage thriller, because that is what this module attempted.
And to understand the modern entertainment landscape where heavily plotted, character-driven adventure paths completely dominate tabletop streams and even video games, we really have to look at these awkward transitional experiments.
Because Curse of Xanathon is where we see the tectonic plates of sandbox freedom and predetermined plot just crashing into each other.
It's a literal collision of design philosophies.
Yeah. But before we can analyze why that structural collision was so revolutionary, we really need to establish the sheer narrative absurdity of what your character actually experiences on the ground.
Oh, the setting is wild.
It's so weird. So the setting is this bustling port town called Rhoona, which is in the Kingdom of Estland. The dossier notes the architecture is very functional. Lots of single-story wooden buildings with sod roofs along a massive fjord.
Right. And the socioeconomic details of Rhoona are actually surprisingly dense for that era of gaming.
Yeah, they really thought it out.
They did. The town has a booming local economy, trading in barley and rye and mutton, but they are world-renowned for their local breweries.
Which is key, right?
Exactly. The designers intentionally established this robust economic engine because it serves as the foundation for the political powder keg that the players just, walk right into.
Because the town is dealing with massive demographic tension. On one side, you have a large population of dwarven immigrants, these hardworking stonemasons, commissioned to build a magnificent new palace for the town's ruler, Duke Stephen.
Who is historically very beloved by the people.
Right. But simultaneously, there is this massive influx of nomadic human immigrants coming through the mountain passes from the Ethingar Khanate.
And these newcomers are bringing exotic livestock, foreign customs, and a totally alien religion to this very insular town.
Which leads to my absolute favorite part of the dossier. The module uses religion as this brilliant visual shorthand for the old alignment system.
Yes, the three temples.
Right. So the traditional establishment follows the order to Forsetta, which is strictly lawful, absolute obedience to the Duke. But then you have the spuming Nuga.
It is such a remarkable piece of grounded lore.
I love it so much. It's a neutral faith worshipped almost exclusively by the local fishermen, and they literally worship a giant spouting whale.
Which is so funny, but also makes sense.
Right. Their whole philosophical outlook is just pragmatically making the best out of a harsh, short existence.
Yeah.
It's deeply cynical, but it makes perfect sense for commoners living in a world where sea monsters are real.
Exactly. But the main conflict stems from the new religion brought by the Ethingarian immigrants, the Temple of Krisha.
The chaotic alignment.
Right. To the locals of Rhoona, this massive new temple is mysterious, grotesque, and just deeply threatening.
So the plot officially kicks off when Duke Stephen abruptly vanishes from public life and starts issuing these bizarre decrees from his palace.
And the decrees are just completely unhinged.
They are so funny. First, there's a strict beer tax. All taxes must be paid exclusively in beer.
Which enrages the dwarven brewers.
Obviously. Next, all citizens must ride their horses backwards, facing the tail. Then fire is entirely outlawed because the Duke claims it makes the sun jealous.
That one is so poetic in a weird
I
way.
mean, sure. Also, meat is declared to be strictly reserved for horses. And finally, the absolute worst decree. All dwarves are essentially banished. Any dwarf found in the city limits will be arrested, shaved, and stretched on racks to make them, quote-unquote, presentable.
Which is just brutal, but the sheer absurdity actually masks a very deliberate mechanical design here.
Wait, really? How so?
Yeah, these decrees are engineered to act as an escalating timeline of pressure. The designer is systematically dismantling the player's resources.
Oh, I see.
Right, like the beer tax creates a massive alcohol shortage, which cripples the tavern economy, where adventurers typically gather rumors.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And outlawing fire is a direct mechanical attack on low-level dungeon crawling
Right.
because you can't carry torches.
Exactly. He's literally weaponizing the rulebook against the players, plunging the city into darkness, and the equestrian law imposes massive logistical movement penalties on the streets.
That's actually brilliant.
Hmm.
But that final decree about the dwarves is the actual ticking clock, right?
Yes, the dwarven population flees Rhoona, but they vow to return with the heavily armed Rockholm military to burn the town to the ground as retribution.
So your party has to fix this crisis before a foreign army arrives. It's such tonal whiplash. We have this incredibly high-stakes geopolitical crisis, a dwarven army marching on a port town, but it's triggered by a cartoonish law about riding horses backwards.
It's like a fantasy sitcom.
Yeah, where the punchline is mutually assured destruction. So what is actually going on behind the scenes?
Well, there's a classic Grima worm-tongue dynamic operating in the shadows. The chaos is a deliberate smokescreen orchestrated by two specific antagonists.
Okay.
First, you have Draco Stormsailor, the treacherous captain of the Ducal Guard.
Right, a guard captain looking to use public outrage to stage a military coup. That's a classic political trope.
Yeah.
But Draco obviously doesn't have the magical capability to drive a sitting duke insane.
No, the real mastermind is the High Priest of Cretia, the titular Xanathon. He is operating as an undercover spy for the Ethangar Khanat.
So he's the one who feeble-minded the duke.
Exactly. His ultimate goal is to completely destabilize the Vestland region, paving the way for an effortless Ithangarian military invasion while Draco is distracted by his own coup.
Man, that is an incredibly ambitious, layered political plot for 1982. And what's fascinating is how the module promises this massive, open-ended sandbox for players to play detective in.
Yeah, the procedural urban generation system.
Right. Rhoona is divided into 11 distinct socioeconomic districts, like the Old Town, the Dwarven Quarters, the Marketplace. And rather than mapping every single building, the module gives the DM randomized tables to generate businesses and taverns on the fly based on where the players decide to walk.
It creates the illusion of total player freedom.
Illusion being the key word here.
Right. Because the actual narrative execution is a fiercely rigid 5-act structure.
Yeah, you start in the tavern to buy rumors. Then you must go to the guard barracks to find one highly specific secret room to get an incriminating note.
Which leads you to assault the Temple of Cretia.
Then you embark on a wilderness trek to a mountain shrine. And finally, you have the palace finale. So if the city generation is so open, how does the designer force players down this specific linear path?
By utilizing a mechanic that would eventually evolve into the modern phylactery or the soul jar.
Right, the invulnerability thing.
Exactly. When players inevitably reach Xanathon early in the temple assault, they discover that his dark god has made him completely invulnerable to both physical and magical attacks.
He's just an unkillable level 14 cleric standing there taking 0 damage from your swords.
Right. The intention was to force players to abandon their typical hack-and-slash instincts. They literally cannot win the fight.
So they have to run.
Yes. They must flee the temple, decipher a map they found, and follow the script into the mountains to locate his soul diamond.
Which is heavily guarded by a specter and a chimera. I know that chimera fight is famously depicted on Tim Truman's iconic cover art for the module.
It is, but this structural whiplash is where the contemporary backlash started.
Yeah, critics at the time immediately realized this was essentially a railroad.
Jim Bombra, writing for White Dwarf magazine in 1983, explicitly called it a programmed affair.
Right, because his main critique was that if players miss that one secret note in the barracks, the adventure just completely halts. There's no alternative path.
None at all. In fact, the module literally instructs the DM to spawn a disguised NPC to fix it.
Yes, the beggar.
Yeah.
A beggar who was actually the high priest of Forsetta. He just walks up to the players in the street and hands them the clues they missed.
It's deployed as an absolute failsafe to keep the predetermined narrative moving, which, infuriated critics who valued organic problem solving.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here and push back on those critics. Is an undercover NPC explicitly handing you the answer a hallmark of fundamentally lazy mystery design? Or is it just pragmatic pacing?
Well,
Because think about the reality of sitting at table. If my group misses a perception check in the barracks, I do not want to spend 3 real-world hours stuck in a tavern rolling dead-end investigation checks. Spawn the beggar. Spoon-feed me the lore so we can get to the fun part.
it's a highly debated point in modern design for sure. But what's fascinating here is that looking at the archival notes, the designers themselves were deeply anxious about this exact problem.
They knew it was an issue.
Oh yeah. Douglas Niles, the author, explicitly warned DMs in the text that if players make wrong decisions, they will simply waste time and achieve no results.
Wow.
Early narrative designers were terrified of giving players too much freedom in a plot-driven game. I mean, the core mechanics of the game were built for mapping empty corridors and calculating encumbrance, not tracking a political conspiracy.
That makes a lot of sense. And that anxiety from the designers didn't just manifest out of nowhere.
Yeah.
The heavy hand-holding and even the cartoonish nature of those decrees we talked about was the direct result of intense real-world pressures happening at TSR, the publisher, in 1982.
Yeah, the corporate environment was highly influential.
Right. To understand why this module feels the way it does, we have to look at the author. Douglas Niles' entry into the industry is legendary.
The proofreading test.
Yes. He applied for an editing position and was given a 14-page proofreading test. Archival lore dictates he only found 3 grammatical errors, spectacularly failing the evaluation.
But he was hired anyway.
Because he had also submitted his own campaign notes and a half-written fantasy novel. Management saw his innate talent for pacing and storytelling, ignored the failed test, and just hired him as a game designer instead.
And he wrote his first module in 4 weeks and then immediately tackled Curse of Xanathon.
Crazy turnaround.
But you have to remember, Niles was at the forefront of a shifting paradigm historians refer to as the Hickman Revolution.
Named after Tracy Hickman.
Right. These were designers who operated more like frustrated novelists. They desperately wanted to emulate the satisfying, dramatic arcs of fantasy literature rather than the chaotic, empty sandbox dungeons of the 1970s.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you've ever tried to force a creative project into a rigid corporate template, you know exactly what Niles was dealing with here. He was basically trying to force a sweeping Shakespearean drama into an engine that was originally built for a tactical demolition derby.
And doing it under massive corporate scrutiny.
Yes, because of the Satanic Panic, right?
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cultural context of 1982 is the other massive factor. There was a widespread moral panic claiming tabletop role-playing games promoted occultism.
So TSR panicked.
They did. To protect their bottom line, they implemented a remarkably strict code of ethics. It banned demons, the glorification of evil, anything too dark.
And that corporate mandate is precisely why Xanathon, who is supposed to be the high priest of a grotesque god, doesn't actually engage in any infernal pacts. His villainy is completely PG-13.
Right. He just makes people ride horses backwards and forces them to pay taxes in beer.
It's all stripped of actual occultism and framed entirely within the safe, abstract boundaries of law versus chaos. Curse of Xanathon is this messy, vital bridge. It's caught halfway between the mechanical wargaming roots of the 70s and the heavily plotted adventure paths we play today.
It wants to be a novel, but it's trapped in a rule book.
Exactly. So what happens when a designer's carefully crafted, novel-like structure collides with the lateral thinking of actual human players?
It completely collapses.
This falls apart.
Completely. The legacy of this module is defined by player ingenuity, absolutely wrecking the rigid structure. The most famous example among archivists is the tackle, tie, and gag sequence break.
Oh, this is where the protophylactory mechanic totally falls apart, right?
The module dictates that because Xanathon is magically invulnerable to damage, the players must go on that epic mountain quest. But early players realized that magical invulnerability does not negate basic physics.
Oh my god.
Xanathon cannot take damage, but he is fundamentally just a man in robes.
So they didn't go to the mountains?
No. Instead of fleeing, players just dogpiled him. By utilizing standard, mundane grappling rules, they tackled him to the ground, tied him up with heavy rope, and shoved a physical gag in his mouth.
So he couldn't perform the verbal components required to cast spells.
Exactly.
That is so brilliant. They completely bypass the entire second half of the module. No wilderness trek, no chimera fight, no mountain shrine.
Not just dragged the invulnerable villain to the town jail and broke the curse through sheer mundane practicality.
It just goes to show that you cannot script human behavior no matter how linear your five-act structure is.
You really can't. And that unpredictable collision between the rules as written and player behavior is a hallmark of the era. But, the module's messy production yielded a few other fascinating historical artifacts, too.
Like the lore issues.
Yeah, because of TSR's rapid expansion, the lore was fraying at the edges. Niles failing that proofreading test definitely shows up in the world building.
Right, the Duke Stephen thing. The module explicitly named the ruler of Rhoona Duke Stephen, but the most prominent ruler in the entire established campaign setting, located just to the south, was named Duke Stefan Karameikos.
With an A instead of an E?
Right. DMs across the country were pulling their hair out trying to figure out how this guy was ruling two different nations simultaneously. TSR eventually had to publish an official clarification stating they were just two completely different monarchs who happened to share a name.
It was so symptomatic of a company producing content faster than they could edit it. But that same procedural generation system we discussed earlier also accidentally birthed a legend.
Oh, the tavern names.
Yes, the module contains a massive random generation table for tavern names, outputting combinations like the Waltzing Dolphin and the Blarney Chicken.
But archival research points to this module containing one of the earliest official printings of the Red Dragon Inn.
Right.
A randomly generated string of text that went on to become like the single most universally recognized starting location trope in fantasy role-playing across the globe.
It's wild to think it started there, yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of Curse of Xanathon is a psychological phenomenon known among archivists as the empty room psych.
Yes, room 19. Okay, so deep in the dungeon beneath the Shrine of Krisha, the module provides a single sentence of read-aloud text for the DM. It literally just says, "This room is completely empty."
And to understand why this broke players' minds, you have to remember the trauma of older modules designed by Gary Gygax and his contemporaries.
The Funhouse Dungeons.
Exactly. Players had been rigorously conditioned by dungeons where every floorboard hit a poison dart and every seemingly empty space held an invisible, acidic, gelatinous cube.
So when the DM explicitly reads the text, "This room is completely empty," the players did not think, "Oh, okay, moving on." They thought, it's a trick.
They panicked.
They spent hours tapping the walls with 10-foot poles, casting Detect Magic, convinced they were missing a vital puzzle. When in reality, the designer just had an empty square on his graph paper map and needed to fill the architectural space.
Literally just filling space.
Which makes me wonder, I need to know your take on this. Does negative space in a dungeon actually build realistic psychological tension? Or is it just the designer running out of ideas and accidentally torturing their players?
Well, it is absolutely vital for architectural verisimilitude.
Okay.
Empty space is the foundation of narrative pacing. If every single room in a stronghold contains a monster, a puzzle, or a trap, the environment ceases to feel like a living, functional world. It becomes an artificial theme park.
Right, it needs to breathe.
Exactly. The negative space allows the tension to breathe. But the fact that players reacted to a moment of quiet with such profound, paralyzing paranoia, it perfectly highlights the disconnect between authorial intent and player experience.
The designer intended for a realistic lull in the action, and the players turned it into an hour of self-inflicted psychological torment.
Pretty much, yeah.
It really is the perfect summary of the tabletop experience. Because Curse of Xanathon is this beautiful paradox. It's a game that promises total sandbox freedom, but secretly forces you on a rigid track. It's a complex geopolitical thriller that gets resolved by riding horses backwards.
It's wonderfully weird.
It really is. But more importantly, for you listening, it proves that evolution, whether you're looking at a hobby, an art form, or even your own career, is rarely a smooth, straight line. It is full of awkward transitions, accidental brilliance, and a few metaphorical, backwards-facing horses.
This raises an important question, though. Think about the tackle, tie, and gag sequence break we discussed. In our own lives and careers, how often do we assume a problem is totally invulnerable?
Oh, that's a great point.
Right, that it requires some epic, complicated soul diamond solution when in reality, we could bypass the entire ordeal by just tackling the issue directly with the simple tools we already have.
Sometimes you don't need to climb a mountain to fight a chimera. You just need a sturdy piece of rope and some common sense. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for those surprising stories hidden in the margins. And remember, just because you're handed a rule book for a rigid political thriller doesn't mean you can't still just kick down the door.